We have Jacob here.
Hello there.
Hiya, Jacob. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, thanks. How are you doing?
Good. Yeah, I'm not too bad. Yeah, bit bored of being stuck in the house, but I'm all right.
Of course, who isn't?
We'll get cracking. I asked you the same question I asked Rob, and it was, have you seen a large shift in technology available to gaming?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I joined SpecialEffect back in 2018, so it's only been a couple of years.
Yeah.
And I knew next to nothing about accessibility. And I think the amount I've learned in those 2 years has been absolutely staggering, and how important this shift in technology for gaming has been for a number of people. So as far as, all the knowledge that I have now, I think it has come a long way since, very early consoles. Because it used to be you start with consoles and gamepads that would, only require a couple of buttons, and they were all like 2D side scrollers, and now you move on to more complicated games that require, numerous amount of buttons and joysticks, and games are just getting more complicated. And I think with accessibility, if you provide settings that sort of make it easier to play those games, it just opens the field up to a lot more players. And it's not just, now to people like with muscular dystrophy, there's a whole range of physical conditions, which is why we do what we do. I guess I should give a background of myself. So I'm an occupational therapist working at SpecialEffect, and my traditional job would be to travel all over the UK to help players with disabilities to get into or get back into gaming, because they're being prevented by physical barriers. And so what we would do, we do these home assessments, and we would try out all kinds of equipment that we think might work with a certain individual, and just come up with a bespoke equipment setup that works for them. And so it's really important that we do these face-to-face assessments, because everybody's different, everybody is unique, everyone's got their own kind of special needs that they need. And so it's so important we know the movements they have and the games they want to play. Because of COVID, things have worked a little bit differently. We haven't been able to go out and see people, unfortunately, this year, since all this happened back in March. So what we've been doing instead is we've been doing video calls instead of individuals, and we've got an amazing team at our headquarters who are posting out the equipment that we think might work for them, and then they get to try it out for as long as they need. What we loan our equipment on a long term, so they can borrow this equipment for as long as they need, as long as they're using it. And then we can have some follow-up calls to see if we need to tweak the setup at all, or whether they need any more extra switches or joysticks. And it's never a one-off visit either. We can see people as many times as needed, as long as they need us. And so I think the landscape has changed so dramatically. I think this generation next in gaming it's kind of paving the way for that, because you've got games like Spider-Man Miles Morales, which I've been lucky enough to play on the PS5, and it's come to a whole host of brilliant settings that I think is quite groundbreaking. For instance, there's a lot of buttons in there, a lot of actions in that game where you require 2 or 3 buttons to be pressed down at the same time. But Insomniac, who created the game, have thought of clever ways of kind of minimizing the actions needed to activate those actions. And so what you could do instead is, rather than having to press L1 and X and circle all at the same time, they've added a nice little feature where you can map a certain action that requires more than one button to press to a single button. So you can just press that button, and you instantly perform an action that would typically require 2 or 3 buttons. And I think it's all about awareness of these kind of things that developers are starting to, get the hang of. As you said, remapping is kind of the gold standard we like to look for for a typical game, even though it's available in PlayStation and Xbox, and Nintendo Switches has recently updated their console to now to do remapping from a system level. But it's not exactly enough. It'd be great if games had their own kind of built-in remapping settings, because people might find it frustrating if they're having to remap stuff in a system level, but then they play a different game that requires a different control layout, and they have to keep going back and having to change the setup, time and time again. So if games have their own unique remapping system, then it just makes it so much easier, a lot less frustration, I think, for gamers who do rely on these remappings to be able to play the games a lot easier. So I'd say it's all about just awareness, and I think developers are sort of getting the hang of it. So yeah, I just think it's so much more better than it probably was, I'd say a few years ago. I would say going to like I think games that I guess maybe have miniature subtitles, something like that. Now they're starting to realize that it's not just down to physical needs either, but people who have like hearing difficulties or visual aids, they're also being considered as well. So it's really great that all these factors are being considered in a large scale.
Yeah, so earlier on, we saw the adaptive controller by Xbox. SpecialEffect actually had a hand in the making of that. Could you tell me a little about that process?
Yeah. So the charity started back in 2007. And that was maybe 11 years later before the Xbox adaptive controller came along. And so the way that we were working was that we were relying on these kind of small companies and these custom-made switch boxes. And by switch box, I mean a machine where you can plug in external switches and joysticks. And from what I heard from some people is that sometimes these bits of kit might take a bit of a while to plug in and play, and there'll be technical issues. And so what we really wanted was a piece of kit that was compatible with console, but also quite easy to use. And so what we ended up doing was that we were having a conversation with Bryce Johnson, and he is a senior inclusive designer at Microsoft, and he's the one who introduced us to this concept of the Xbox adaptive controller. And so with our experience of players that rely on stuff like external switches and joysticks, we sort of brought that collective experience and sort of feedback to Bryce and everyone at Microsoft as to what we would like to get out of our product. We wanted a product that was easily accessible, and you can still plug in switches and joysticks, and it's sort of plug and play, don't even need adapters or anything like that, and if possible can work wirelessly. So members of our team ended up going to Seattle to the Xbox Accessibility Lab, and there was shown an early prototype of what the adaptive controller was going to look like. And then after we had a little play around with it, we gave our feedback and our thoughts on it. And then the Xbox team came and visited our center, and they showed us the most recent prototypes after the feedback that we gave back, and they sort of fed back to that. And then it was, just a case of, back and forth and just making sure that this this controller is kind of, what we're looking for, and it's versatile for a whole range of conditions and not just sort of limited to a particular condition. It's I think it was a lengthy process, but what came from it was pretty groundbreaking, I think, because we use the Xbox data controller very frequently, I would say, and we can get it working on not just the Xbox, but through the use of adapters and stuff. We can get it working on the PlayStation and Nintendo Switch, and it's just made a lot more of a kind of smooth process in these bespoke assessments that we've been doing, where you can literally just plug it in and set up a Copilot if you need to, and it's just so straightforward. And there's a range of switches and joysticks, so you can plug into it. And so we are extremely fond of the product, and we're looking forward to see if any any other product comes from other companies, like from Sony or from Nintendo at all, because you know, as much as we can use the Xbox tactile controller with other consoles, it would be nice if there was something as, you know, reliable and smooth that can go or be connected as easily as that to the Xbox.
Yeah. And quickly, what would you say to people who aren't particularly tech savvy and are a bit taken aback by all this talk about technologies? What advice would you give to those people?
Yeah, it is a minefield out there, and that's why this charity came about. It was to try and show people, you know, try out this bit of equipment, see if this works for you. If not, then we'll try something else. I would say our first port of call would be to go to the Game Access website that we've got. So it's gameaccess.info, I think it is, and that's got a whole range of resources. It might be also worth checking out our YouTube channel, SpecialEffect, and there's loads of videos we've done on specific games, on the controls and settings of some games, and equipment, including joysticks and switches. But, you know, once you have a look, I really recommend you take a look at it, because lots on there, and it's always worth, you know, just dropping us a line and see if we can help out with any advice about gaming in any way.
All right. Yeah. Thank you very much for talking to us today. It gave us a lot of information. I think it'll help a lot of people today. So thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.